Now we are.
All right. Cool. Thanks, Chef. Okay. So I was going to say, so this week we're going to be going over the straight dough method, which is something that we covered last week. And I just wanted to start first of all by telling you guys a little bit about, yeasted doughs, right? When it comes to yeasted doughs, we do have three kinds of yeasted doughs. We have the lean doughs, which is what we covered last week, right? Lean doughs means that it's fat-free, or sometimes there might be like less than 5% fat added to it. But the French baguette that you guys did this week is actually 0% fat, right? So it's considered a lean dough. Now, the thing about lean doughs is that we tend to bake them at a higher temperature because that's going to ensure that we have a beautiful golden brown crust, right? If you guys think about the texture of a beautiful, earthy kind of a bread, like baguette, for example, or any other kind of rustic bread, they have this gorgeous, crusty crust on the outside, right? Golden brown. But when you guys cut it inside, it's all tender and soft, that crumb, very soft. So in order to achieve that, we want to make sure that we do bake this type of breads, lean doughs. We bake them at a higher temperature. I believe last week we were baking at 450, I believe it was, 450. And so that's what's going to achieve. Now, the only downside of lean doughs is that because the lack of fat that's inside, obviously that type of bread is going to stale much faster. We do have... at the moment, that's one of the things I remember from culinary school, my instructor telling me, the moment you take the bread out of the oven, it starts to stale, right? You're racing against that time. So there's different things you can do to avoid staling so it doesn't stale too quickly. Number one, you guys, the best thing to do is actually to preserve your bread by freezing, right? So especially if you guys are baking a lot of bread, I don't know if you guys ate all those 3 baguettes. I don't blame you if you did because they're so good. But if, let's say, for example, you say, well, that's too much bread for me. I want to preserve it a little bit longer. The best thing to do is wrap up the bread really well in plastic. You can label it so you know when you made it, and then throw it in the freezer. When you're ready to consume it, you just take it out of the freezer, maybe let it thaw a little bit, or sometimes I just throw it in the oven, maybe at 300 to 350 degree oven, so I can start to kind of warm it up and recrisp the crust. So that's one way of preserving it. All the times that I've actually refreshed my bread by reheating it, it always tastes like it's fresh, So that's one way of preserving or slowing down or actually stopping the staining process. The other way you can do it is if you want to keep it fresh, like our room temperature. Obviously, what's one of the things you guys do when you buy bread to avoid from drying out? Anybody wants to share? Yeah, tell me. Danny.
Wrap it in plastic and put it on the counter.
There you go. That's another way of actually preserving or slowing down the staling process. That's going to slow it down, right? Freezing is going to stop the staling process. Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Danny. That's what we do, right? Keeping the freshness, keeping the moisture in. Now, I know most of us, we practiced this in the past where we wrap it up and we put it in the refrigerator, right? What are we trying to preserve it from? Anybody knows? If I put it in the refrigerator, what am I trying to do?
The air and the air from the room, all the air. You're trying to get rid of the air.
Okay, so preserving it from the air. But what else is mostly, what's the reason why we put it in the refrigerator? To prevent it from getting what?
Moist.
Boiled.
Well, it's going to get moist because yeah. What about molding?
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
Molding. So usually we tend to have that problem when it's hot temperature in our house. The bread tends to kind of mold really quickly, right? So by putting it in the refrigerator is going to pretty much stop the molding from happening or slowing it down. Now, I'll tell you guys, when you guys put bread in the refrigerator, it actually speeds the staling process, exactly. So if you want to keep it away from mold, sure, refrigerate it because maybe the house is too hot. But if you can, that's going to stale your bread much faster, though, that process. So I always suggest that if you have a lot of bread, that you baked, go ahead and put it in the freezer. That's the best place to put it. All right, so the second part, the second type of yeasted doughs we have are enriched doughs. And that's what we're going to be covering this week. Enriched doughs is any type of bread, right? When we look at our recipe, it contains a little bit of fat, maybe in the form of eggs, maybe in the form of milk, maybe in the form of butter or oil, right? So that's considered enriched doughs. They are enriched with extra vitamins, extra fat, sometimes even a little bit of extra sugar, added to those recipes. And when we do deal with enriched doughs, we don't bake at a high temperature because the idea is to preserve this kind of soft and tender crust. So we tend to bake roughly about 350 to 400 degrees. Obviously, the crumb inside stays nice and soft, and sometimes the crust also remains a little bit soft. So I'll give you an example. Obviously, focaccia is an example of an enriched dough. Burger buns, right? Dinner rolls, those kind of breads are considered enriched doughs. Are you guys familiar with this beautiful braided bread called challah? You have to do it that way, you guys. Challah. Challah is a Jewish braided bread. It's so good. I love it. You can use it for, I love it with French toast. I think we were talking about that last week. So that's considered an enriched dough, right? Now, an enriched dough has less than 20% fat, less than 20% fat. Now, the third part, or the third type of yeasted dough is what we call the rich doughs, right? For example, if you guys are familiar with brioche, are you guys familiar with that bread? I'm going to tell you guys, brioche is my best friend. I love brioche. It's so tender. It's so rich with this. There's so much fat added to that bread, So it's usually rich because it has 20% fat or higher, right? These are the type of breads that we want to bake at a lower temperature. We're talking about 350, 375 degrees. We want to keep it below 400 degrees because they usually tend to be higher in fat. And especially if we're using butter, there's milk solids, right, that are going to enhance the color. There's sometimes added more sugar to these recipes. And so when you take a look at, when we're talking about staling, these are the type of breads that are going to last longer, fresher, because there's more fat added. Fat, it is a preservative, It helps to keep your product moist and soft a little bit longer. All right, so let's take a look. This week, we're going to be going over focaccia, right? And so focaccia is considered it's an Italian flatbread. You can actually treat focaccia kind of like a pizza, pretty much. I'm going to show you guys some pictures of focaccia so you can get excited about it. Right, so we have this one. To me, it's a little thin. I like my focaccias to be a lot thicker, but this is a beautiful one. It's very consistent in the thickness. You can see there. The color's gorgeous. I love the color. This one is an herb focaccia, maybe rosemary with some salt on top, right? Very classic. We have another type of focaccia right here. This one has fresh tomatoes, cherry tomatoes that they just kind of cut on top. Maybe they season with a little salt and pepper and a little olive oil, and it just makes this beautiful presentation at the end. And so, just two examples of focaccia. Focaccia is usually baked in a sheet pan, like in a half sheet pan, and it takes the shape of that pan, right? So it's going to have this rectangular shape. It's going to be, depending on the recipe that you're using, like for example, this one seems a little thin, so that means the recipe was a little small. But depending on the size, you can actually cut them in half. You can make sandwiches with it. You can make croutons. You can serve it with salad, with soups, And of course, my favorite way of eating it is just putting a little olive oil and vinegar together and just dip. That's my way of doing it. So we're going to be doing this focaccia this week. And you guys are actually welcome. And Chef, I don't know how you feel about this, but there's some suggestions, what flavor to give for this week. I'm okay if you guys want to play around with, putting on top, let's say, an herb, or maybe putting some olives on top, or maybe it's like the photograph that you guys saw, some tomatoes on top. Sun-dried tomatoes are delicious, right? So how do you feel, Chef, about that?
Sun-dried tomatoes, roasted garlic, fresh rosemary, Pecorino Romano cheese. Go for it, guys.
Exactly. So it's about getting that dough, right? We're not going to be changing the recipe when it comes to the actual dough. And I'm going to show you guys in a little bit. You guys can play around with your toppings, okay? Just to kind of give it a different look. Now, one of the things I want to do with you guys is I want to explain the dough just a little bit because it's going to be a shock going from baguette dough, right, to this focaccia dough that you guys are going to be making. Can somebody explain to me how was the feel when you guys had a fully formed dough for the French bread? Was it manageable? Was it too sticky? Was it too dry? Anybody remembers? Terry? Sorry to pick on you, Terry.
I said perfect. I mean, it was neither. I used a little bit of flour, but it was perfect. And at first I didn't get the pressing it down and the heel thing, but as the gas kind of came out, you know, the little farts or whatever,
Yeah.
the little belches. And once I read it in the reading, I totally got it.
Cool. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. That means your measurements, Terry, were perfect. You were able to, yeah, Terry, you were able to create a dough that is manageable, that it's not too sticky. You know, maybe just putting a little flour on your hands just to kind of like bring it together. It works perfectly, right? Travis, how was your dough?
Well, mine turned out pretty well. I mean, after it started setting, it was sticky beginning, but as I did the resting for a half hour, after I got to the last one, it was like perfectly, it was like light. It was feeling kind of weird.
Yeah.
And then the 2 hours that I set on the pan, it went from like that big around to like that big around. And I stretched them out and it turned out to be, I know, like a billy club size.
Okay. Now I'll tell you guys, if anybody had too sticky, like if it was really sticky, I'll be honest, your measurements were off, right? They were off because it shouldn't be too sticky. Sometimes if you live in a very humid environment, like I'm talking about Florida or the South, right? North Carolina, South Carolina, those areas are really, really humid. You might see a little tiny stickiness in it, and that's okay. You can fix it by adding just a little tiny more flour onto the table, kneading it a little bit longer, and that's going to bring your dough nicely, you know, not firm or manageable, I should say, but it shouldn't be dry, you know. So, but if it was really, really wet, that means your measurements were off. Now, I want to do this little practice with you guys. I want to, and I know I'm showing you the French bread. Don't freak out, you guys. You're not going to do it again. But I just wanted to show you something. There's something that we call baker's percentage, and I want to have you guys understand this so you can understand your focaccia dough. Now, when we look at a recipe, right, we always compare. Like if I want to know how much moisture does this French bread has, I always compare the water against the flour. The flour is always considered 100%. So if I want to know how much humidity or how much moisture does this recipe have, I'm going to take 350 degrees and I'm going to always divide it by the flour. So I'm going to do the math really quickly. 350 divided by 500. And it's giving me 70%, right? 0.7 times 100, 70%. So that means that this French recipe, it's 70% moisture, right? And so, okay, 70%, I'm going to give you an example, you guys. 60 to 70%, you're going to create a dough that is quite manageable to the touch, right? When you guys mix it together, it comes together nicely. It still feels soft, but it's not sticky. So that's usually French bread, pizza dough, right? So that's going to be nice. Now, let's take a look at this little recipe that you guys are going to be working this week. Now, this recipe, take a look, right? If you guys want to know how much moisture it has, you're going to divide 600 grams of water, and you're going to divide it by 750. So 600 divided by 750. Does anybody, did anybody get the results there? Do you want to, if you're doing it with your calculator, what was the percentage that you guys got? So 600 divided by 750. Anybody want to shout the percentage there? I know we're doing a little math, you guys. I got it. Did you guys get 80%? Right? So 80%, right? This recipe has 80% moisture. Now, how is it going to be when you guys mix it all together with the flour and the water and the yeast and the salt? Can anybody tell me how this dough is going to feel like? What do you guys think?
A little stickier than last week.
Yes, it's going to be stickier, right? So focaccia tends to be a lot more higher in hydration. We call it hydration in the baking area. It's going to be higher hydration. That means it's going to be stickier than your baguette. And I wanted to do that comparison because I don't want you guys to start mixing and you're going to say, oh my God, did I do the measurements incorrect? I don't want you guys to freak out about that. It's going to be sticky, just a little sticky. Now, if it gets to a point that is too sticky and you're not able to not even, I don't suggest this week to use your hands for kneading. That's going to be kind of difficult. Use a rubber spatula or maybe a wooden spoon just to kind of mix the product in, right? When you get finally to mixing it, if you can, put a little bit of flour onto your hands and then you're just going to go in there and just kind of lightly move it back and forth because it's going to be a little sticky. Please don't dry it out. Don't feel like, okay, I have to add more flour because it is too sticky. Leave it the way it is if you can. If you guys take a look, and I don't think that photograph does me well right here, the one that I was showing you. But usually focaccia tends to have bigger holes, right? When it rises to the top, it has bigger holes than your baguette. Bigger holes means that it's higher moisture. God, what is the name of that bread? I always forget the name of that bread that it's super sticky. I don't know if you know. I went blank.
Super sticky dough?
Yeah, very sticky. It's focaccia. It's even higher than 80%, and I can't think of it. I'll come right now.
Not like ciabatta or something like
Ciabatta.
that?
There you go.
Yeah.
You got it. Yeah, ciabatta. Ciabatta is actually higher than 80%. It's about 85, sometimes to even 90% water inside. So you cannot even shape, that ciabatta. You tend to kind of just cut up pieces of it and just rest it on top of dusted flour tables, so they can kind of rise there. But this one is going to be just, like I said, a little bit stickier. Leave it the way it is. If it's a little bit uncomfortable for you, maybe just a little tiny flour, just a little tiny flour. We're talking about an extra ounce or so, the most.
Carla, did you see Sandra's question?
No, I didn't. Would you?
Oh, sure.
Would you read it for me? Sandra. Hi, Sandra.
Hi, chefs. Good to see you.
Hi.
Well, I was a little confused with the demo video with the chef to make the baguettes and the written recipe because 7 hours. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
In total, there were 7.5 hours of resting of the dough. The video in total was 5.5 hours. So there was a 2 hours difference in the resting and proofing and everything. So I was making the bread following the written recipe, right? And at the end, it was kind of, my breads were kind of sticky, my dough. So I decided to put some flour on the counter to be able to manage to handle them, a little better. But I remember the chef in the video said, avoid the temptation to put flour because you don't need it.
You don't need it.
But when I put the flour on the counter and I started working on the 3 pieces of dough,
it was better, right?
That helped. That's when it really helped me to do the punching and everything. But the difference of 2 hours between the two, the recipe and the video, they really confused me.
Now you did right, Sandra. If the dough is too sticky, you add just a little tiny flour to it, especially for a baguette dough, for the French bread. You do add a little tiny flour. And the reasons why is because maybe where you live is a lot more stickier, more humidity,
Yeah.
So that might have to do something with that.
Yeah. But the total time, I'm sorry. But the total time of the French baguette dough to rest would be more towards 5.5 or 7.5 or.
Well, here's the thing.
It depends on the weather and stuff, but I don't know if it makes a big difference. The time.
Well, I'll tell you this, Sandra. I'm sorry I cut. I think I mentioned this last week that I don't like to go based on time, right? I go based on how the dough feels. So for example, if the temperature of your kitchen is much colder, it's going to take longer, for it to completely get to the right consistency, which is, I usually go based on the size of the dough. I look at the original size, right? And when it's double in size, that's when I know it's ready to go. So it might take longer in your house, let's say, in case if it's a little too cold. It might take a little bit shorter in somebody who has a kitchen that is a little warmer. So I always don't like to go based on time. I always go based on if it doubles in size.
Yeah, I remember I read that on the recipe, or the chef said that to double in the size. That's what I did, and it was funny because I'm in Florida. It's really hot, pretty much, and humid, but we got a cold front, so it was very cold in the morning. Then it got hot, then it got cold, so I was putting this dough everywhere around my house.
Yes.
Until, at the end it became double.
Makes sense, right? Makes sense. Yeah, the yeast is going to react based on the temperature. If it's warmer, we're talking about between 70 to about 100 degrees, the yeast will react faster. It's going to start releasing carbon dioxide a lot faster. That means you will notice your dough rising faster. But if it's colder, it's really slow. And we can't really push it, You can try different things like moving it to a warmer area in your house. But so I would say just stay with how the dough looks, how the, if the dough looks like it's double in size, then you're good to go. It should feel like a marshmallow, you guys. If you have squeezed a little marshmallow, right? Very kind of tender and soft, but you squeeze it, but it doesn't deflate and collapse. If it deflates and collapses, that means you overproofed it. That means the skin of the dough is way too overstretched. And the moment you squeeze it, it tears and all the carbon dioxide, it gets released. So now if it feels a little dense, that means it's underproof, right? Still might feel a little dense and heavy. So I know it's one of those things, you guys, that the more you do it, the better you get at reading the dough, and understanding the dough.
Yeah, practice, but finally got some bread. Thank you. It was delicious anyways.
Oh yeah, I know. Let me move to Bonnie and then Terry. Hi Bonnie.
Hi y'all. First of all, sorry I haven't been in here in a couple weeks.
It's okay, Bonnie.
So I was a little confused by the differences in the video and the recipe. And I even put in my narrative that because I live in South Carolina, so the moisture in my air here is different. And I had to repeat the process of the 30-minute intervals of the folding and resting more than the recommended time that was in the recipe, the written recipe. And then when I was watching the video, it said to allow to rest overnight. So what I have done and taken upon myself is right now I currently have dough that I made when I got home from work that I'm going to allow to rest until tomorrow, just so that I can see the difference because of the difference in the environment, pretty much. Because I feel like I was satisfied, but not fully satisfied with my final product.
Okay.
Maybe that's because I'm very embedded into the industry, and I was just like,
you've seen the good quality out there.
Yeah. So, and I brought one into my executive chef, and she was like, well, you could have let it rest longer, or you could have, so I'm trying it exactly by the video this time versus and I like to do these experimental things. That's what I do, but versus the actual handwritten recipe. And I guess if you want, I can put that in Class Cafe just to show the difference.
Sure.
But I'm concerned by the fact that I had to wait an extra 2 hours through that process of the 30-minute resting time. And I don't think that was just a South Carolina thing, because I've had a couple of my classmates also tell me the differences between the video and the written recipe. So what should we go by when it comes to this focaccia?
All right.
I want to go by the written recipe or by the video or by my chefs right now. So I want to make sure that properly.
Well, let me open up the recipe really quickly, and what I would do right now. I'll tell you, you guys are going to do something similar to last week, where you're going to be stretching the dough and folding it, right? And it tells you here to do this 2 more. So you're going to do it 3 times. I think it's a total of 4 times because you do it once and then you do it again. So it's 4 times, 30 minutes. Okay, what you're doing, you guys, is you're actually allowing the dough to rest and to start for the fermentation process. Fermentation means flavor, right? So what you're doing is you're actually developing flavor within those 2 hours. I would say follow that. You let it rest, you stretch it, you fold it, let it rest for 30 minutes, stretch it again. After 30 minutes, the gluten should be relaxed, that it should allow you to stretch the dough back again. You're gonna fold it, let it rest for 30 minutes. I would do that because that means you're doing it for 2 hours. So that's 2 hours of fermentation that you're developing flavor. Now, when you start to shape it, right? So in the example of the baguettes, once you guys shape them, then I would go based on the size of the baguette. Did they double in size? That's what I would base it on that. Because now you're not really developing, I mean, you are still developing flavor because it's fermentation, but you're going based on the size that, you know, how much has it, you know, gone up, right? It rose. So does that make sense? I don't know.
Well, it does make sense, I guess, because I see the similarities in this recipe versus the recipe we did. And I know that I pretty much had to add a half of time. Like I had to, instead of adding an additional 2 hours of that same folding, 30-minute resting and rising and fermentation, I had to add a whole additional hour to that. And I don't know if that's just because of the climate that I'm in, or, and I'm wondering that if do I need to do that same thing with the focaccia? Because I want to have my final product. Like I'm a stickler on what I'm going to serve to somebody.
Well, it could be 2 things. It could be the environment. You know, I don't know how cold or how warm the environment was in your kitchen. It was cold. Okay, so then that makes sense. If it was cold, that means you're going to go longer with the proofing because the yeast is reacting very slowly to the fermentation. I mean, if the temperature is too cold, it's gonna take longer to ferment. Longer than
like at work, because of our cold here, we put things like we have our convection oven, so we'll put them like right next to the oven so it gets the heat from the oven. Should I use that same concept doing my project here at home?
Yeah, one of the things that I like to do is when I start making bread, I like to turn my ovens on, especially if my kitchen is cold. I like to turn my ovens on a little early, you know, just to start warming up the area. Obviously, my burners from my stoves, they don't have a pilot light. So I'm able to put the bowls right on top of the, you know, the burners because I don't have a pilot light. If I had a pilot light, I would probably flip a pot over and elevate my bowl, but it's surrounded by the warmth of the oven. And that's going to make your product rise faster, okay?
You have to remember that yeast is an organism, and it's going to respond to the environment. So if you have a cooler temperature in your kitchen, it's going to react very slowly. It really gets happy in between 90 and 100 degrees. That's optimal temperature right there. That's when it really starts producing.
Exactly, Chef. Yeah. So that I hope that helps, Bonnie, for the next one.
Yes, that definitely helps. I just, you know, I would rather ask while I'm here in class than, you know, have to go through what I'm
doing. You're helping everybody else too, so they can kind of work with their, you know, their own bread this week. All right, cool. And Terry, hi Terry.
Hey, my question was back to you were talking about the ciabatta bread. With it such so moist, so does it have a higher fat content?
Not necessarily higher fat content. It's just more water. There's more water added to the recipe, and that's what makes it really sticky and kind of hard to handle, you know, when you're shaping it.
Okay.
Yeah. So
is it still a lean dough, or is it a?
It is considered a lean dough. Yes. Yeah. Most of the time, ciabatta is lean dough. It's kind of like baguette, but it's more higher water content. Cool.
Okay.
All right. Cool. Hey, great question. Okay, you guys. So let's take a look at the recipe, right? So let's go over the the recipe for this week, for the focaccia. So you guys need you definitely need that bread flour. It's very important that you do try to get that bread flour. Obviously, if you have a hard time finding it, your next bet would be unbleached all-purpose flour. Unbleached because that means you have a higher amount of protein in there. We want to be able to develop glutens for this recipe, especially when we have a higher amount of water. The glutens are going to be a little bit softer, harder to develop. You are using instant yeast. If you still have a little bit of, if you ended up using active dry the last time, it's going to be 22 grams of active dry. But instant is 15 grams, just a little heads up. Kosher salt, olive oil, see, there's 75 grams. So that's what makes it a little bit enriched. And then obviously they're giving you an option of mixed dry herbs, and this is optional. You guys can use fresh herbs like rosemary, works really well. Thyme works really good. Like I said, if you guys want to put some olives on top, some sun-dried tomatoes, maybe some caramelized onions, whatever you guys want to put on top, we're happy with. But don't mess around with this recipe. Don't change it up, right? Because if you guys add, let's say, for example, olives inside the dough, if you didn't squeeze the olives enough, you're adding extra moisture, and now you're going to have a dough that is going to be harder to work with. So it's going to be similar to last week, you guys. Take all these ingredients. This is a straight dough method, right? If you're working with instant yeast, you do not have to dissolve this yeast. You can add it all together with all these ingredients right here. You can mix them really well. If you want to put some herbs or fresh herbs into the dough, that's perfect because you're not adding extra moisture to it. And so you can start mixing all this. Like I said, use a rubber spatula or a spoon just to kind of bring everything together. And then, of course, you're going to do what we call the bulk fermentation. I'm going to take you to the reading again, right? So scaling the ingredients, that's the very first step. The second one is mixing. All the steps, you guys, usually have to happen in order. You cannot jump around. So mixing is going to be the second step, and then the next step is to do the bulk fermentation, which is this right here, where it says let it rest for 1 hour, right? You're going to let it rest. Once it looks like it has double in size, doesn't look like it's double in size, let it rise a little bit longer. And then you're going to take it to your kitchen counter. You're going to put some bread flour, and you're going to kind of sit it on top, and you're going to start stretching it so you can form it into this kind of rectangular shape, and you're going to fold it in thirds. And you're going to do that, if this is step number 1 right here, and you're going to repeat it 3 more times, you're doing it 4 times altogether. So that means you're doing 2 hours of stretching and folding, stretching and folding. I suggest to follow those steps just the way they are. Now, you do have 2 options right here, you guys. And the option is either option number, letter B, it's you can continue at this point. If you guys want to continue with the process where you put it into a sheet pan with a little olive oil on the bottom, and you want to you start stretching it and shaping it, that means you continue with the process all the way from start to finish. That's your option B. If you are a little bit behind in your time, or you don't have enough hours to complete this, option A just means that you're going to be putting the dough that you've been stretching and folding for 2 hours, you're going to put it in there either in a plastic bag or in a bowl. And by the way, if you're going to use a plastic bag, I strongly suggest to drizzle a little bit of oil inside so it doesn't stick all over the plastic. And this is just resting it inside the refrigerator. And that's going to give you, it's what we call the slow fermentation process, right? It's still part of the bulk fermentation, but you're doing a slow fermentation because you're putting it in a very, very cold environment. The yeast is still active, but it is active very slowly. So it starts to feed from the starches, turns it into sugar, right? And that becomes carbon dioxide at the end. And the fermentation is really slow. So if you want to do this a 2-day process, you can. And so after stretching and folding for 2 hours, then you can take your dough, put it in a bowl, cover it really tight, and put it in the refrigerator until the next day if you guys want to stretch, if you want to stretch that into 2 days. It just helps you with your timing. If you guys want to just jump in and continue with the shaping, then you will do the option B for that. Now, for the option B, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be putting a little bit of olive oil onto your sheet pan, right? So you're going to take a half sheet pan, put some olive oil on the bottom so it doesn't stick, and you're going to take your dough after it has double in size. Try not to deflate it because it's super relaxed at that point. Those glutens are relaxed. So you're going to lift it like a little baby and you're going to sit it on top of the sheet pan. And then you're going to put a little oil on top of the dough. You're going to start stretching it. Do you guys see those huge bubbles right here? Those bubbles mean that there's a lot of humidity inside this dough. So you're going to stretch it. Make sure that you start from the center and work your way to the corners, right? Make sure that it's as even as you can get it. If it doesn't hug those corners perfectly, don't stress about it. As it starts to double in size, it's going to start hugging the corners much, much more. So you're going to stretch it. And now this is the process that we call, this is the actual shaping part right here, you guys. So I'm going to take you back to the reading from last week, right? So you have done so far scaling ingredients, mixing, bulk fermentation, right? You guys did the folding and stretching for 2 hours. There's no dividing this week because you're going to use the entire dough. It's going to become your bread. So you're going to skip step number 5. There's no dividing. There's no reshaping or rounding, right? You're going to skip number 6. There's no bench fermentation because we didn't divide any pieces. You're going to go straight to number 8, which is the shaping. Makeup and panning means shaping. So this is your shaping right here. Where did it go? Right here. This is your shaping. And then, of course, after that is the proofing part. And when we proof it, we want to make sure that we look for double in size. So however cold or hot or your environment is in your house, what you're looking for is pay attention to the thickness that you start after you stretch it. And that's when you want to take it out, and be ready to bake it when it has double in size. So, just keep an eye. It's all a visual part of it. I do see, Terry, you have a question? No? Oh, it's from your previous, so I'm gonna lower your hand, and there you go. Okay, so that's your process right there, you guys, of the shaping part. I'm gonna go ahead and share that again. Now, the next step, obviously, when it has double in size, right? You after the proofing part, and you double in size, it's ready to bake. Now, right before baking, what you guys are going to be doing is you're going to be putting your fingers right. I'm going to show you. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing. Focaccia is very well known for its dimples, right? Have you guys seen the dimples of the focaccia? It just has like little dimples up and down. So you're going to do them with your fingers. Yeah, I see your dimple over there. So you're going to do it with your fingers. So you guys going to go into the nice little half sheet pan. Very gentle. You're going to just go tup, 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 and just a couple of dimples, okay? Don't get too crazy with the dimples, you guys, because the more you go in there to do this, you're deflating, and the more dense that dough is going to be. So just a couple of times, you're going to go like this, and you're done. I'm going to tell you guys, when I was working in one of the ground schools at Le Cordon Bleu, I saw a student that went like this, finger by finger by finger, and through the entire thing. I was like, what did you do? It's completely deflated, so now you have a really dense focaccia at the end. So just a couple little dimples and you're done. And then, of course, the topping comes in, right? You can add, like I said, you can treat it just like a pizza if you like, But if you want to keep it simple, even like a simple would be by sprinkling a little bit of salt on top and you just bake it off. I like a little bit of color when a focaccia is baked. So you want to take it to about something like this is gorgeous, and this is a photograph that I like to share because if you guys have a cast iron skillet, you can actually bake it in a cast iron skillet. If it's a small cast iron skillet, make sure that you divide the dough into 2 pieces, or else it's going to start just overflowing and just kind of crawling out of there. So make sure that it is a perfect recipe for a half sheet pan. So keep that in mind if you want to use the cast iron skillet. But look at how beautiful that looks, right? beautiful color, so you can have a little crumb, a little crunchiness, and soft and tender in the middle. So here's an example of that. Ooh, look at that one, you guys. Look how gorgeous that is, right? I mean, again, you can treat it just like a pizza. This one has like some sort of white sauce, cheesy white sauce. I love this cherry tomato, like in a cluster still. There's some vegetables there. If you guys are going to be doing like fresh herbs, like for example, basil, or even like arugula, like in this case, I love this type of pizza with a green in it. I suggest to do it right after it comes out of the oven so it doesn't burn. It will tend to burn, the leaves. It's going to burn them. So I suggest to finish it off. You can put a little olive oil, a little salt and pepper, and of course, you guys can have fun with that. You can have fun with making a sandwich with this, right? It looks really pretty. Do I have another picture? Oh yeah, one more. And this one has just a little vegetables that you can kind of grill in advance, to remove the excess moisture from the vegetable. And then once they're nice and grilled and seasoned and smoky and everything, then you guys can kind of put it on top of your focaccia. So I think that's, oh no, there's one more. All right, so here's another one. This is just kind of finishing it off with, a little bit of greens. You can see there's like maybe some sort of dry meat in there, like prosciutto or copa or, all the good stuff that I like. So it's your choice. Do I have another one? Nope, that's the last one. Okay, so, but that's the key. You want to make sure that you do develop that flavor through the fermentation process. That stretching and folding is your time to develop flavor. If you guys do the cold, fermentation overnight, that's going to also develop flavor very slowly, but it does. If you guys want to bake it right away from making the dough straight, obviously it's going to take a long time to do it, right? Just kind of like the French bread, but it's definitely doable. Now, once it comes out of the oven, I suggest to completely cool it down. And I'm going to take you guys back to the 12 steps in your reading. One of them is cooling. You can see that number 11 it's very, very important that you guys do cool, because when we finish, the moment that we finish baking, there's a lot of steam running around the dough, right? Because it's hot, right? So as soon as you open it, the steam is going to rush to the cut. And then it's going to give you this kind of a false look that it's still mushy and underbaked. So I suggest to completely finish cooling it down. If you let it sit too long inside the sheet pan, it's going to start releasing a lot of steam from the bottom, and you're going to have a soggy bottom. Nobody likes a soggy bottom. So make sure that if you can, whenever you can remove it with maybe some spatulas and put it on a cooling rack. That way it can air out from the bottom and up. That way you have a crusty bottom versus a soggy bottom. Are there any questions so far? Oh, I do see two questions. Linda.
Yeah,
Hi, Linda.
too.
Okay.
Does water have to be a certain temperature before you put it into the dough?
Well, I'll tell you this, Linda. Yeast will react faster with a warmer water, right? It doesn't have to be warm, but if you do provide a little warm water, we're talking about 85-degree water, 90-degree water. I think it's perfect for the yeast, because you're going to start activating it faster. It's going to start working a little bit faster. So yes, a little lukewarm water, 85 to 90 degrees is really important. I mean, it helps. Now, be very careful, because I wouldn't suggest to just run your fingers and say, oh yeah, that feels like 85 degrees. Put a thermometer inside, because if we do end up overheating the water, the yeast will die. We will kill the yeast. It dies at about 140 degrees. So if you can take hot water, you might end up killing it. So put a thermometer inside. But yes, it does help. What's your second question?
Whenever I go to do the focaccia, after I bake it off, when I go to put the stuff on top of it, can I rebake that? Or, because I was thinking about doing like a pepperoni cheese type of thing.
Well, you can, depending on what you're putting on top, right? Like, for example, if it's cheese, that if you think it's going to get too dark while it's baking, if you put it from the beginning, you can actually start baking the focaccia in advance until you see that it's starting to look a little pale, like a little pale brown. Take it out, spread your ingredients and put it back into the oven.
Okay.
Right. So that's one way of doing it. If you have something, let's say, for example, those grilled vegetables that I don't mind if they get just a little golden brown, I can put them from the beginning, like while the dough is still raw, put them in the oven and let it bake all the way through. So it all depends on what you're doing. Cheese will tend to darken a little faster, you know. So you could do it, bake it in advance, just, you know, how long would you bake it? Well, I always like to go based on the color, like a light brown color. You can take it out and you can put your toppings and put it back in. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Linda. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi again. No, so I brought this pan to see if it is the correct pan. It looks to be the pan that's in the video. I've had a couple of my classmates message me on Facebook Messenger or message me on here and ask me what pan I'm going to use. So I just wanted to see if I showed y'all, is this the...
Yeah, that will work. That's like a cookie sheet. That will work, and I think it's deep enough that it can, you can hold it.
Got the nice...
Yeah.
So I wanted to show that to ask,
Yeah.
you know, your opinion, and also to show, because I can't send messages to everybody. I love everybody, but I can't.
Yeah, no, that will work. So that will be fine. But, you know, just a regular sheet pan, if anybody has just a regular sheet pan at home, that will work as fine. Like I said, you can put it, I've actually had students put it in cake pans before, right? They put it in cast iron skillets, you know? So pretty much anything that can take the heat inside the oven will work in reality. Okay? Everything good? Okay, let me go ahead and, Travis, you have a question?
Yeah, when you was talking about, is it possible to put fruit on top of it?
You know what? I'll tell you. Yes, it's possible, but it's not.
Is it gonna taste good?
I've done it with dried fruit before, like
Yeah,
that.
that's what I was thinking of.
We did like a real fine chiffonade apricot that kind of just popped the flavor, and then we topped it with an arugula salad with pickled onions and balsamic vinegar, and those flavors work real well. But as far as the fresh fruit, I'd be really cautious about that because you're going to be introducing a lot of moisture into the dough. And you know, speaking about the toppings in general, I think it's real critical that you be real conservative with how much you put on there, because with focaccia, less is more. If you put too much topping on top of that dough, you're going to prevent it from being able to rise, and you're going to get a real thick, dense. If you took a look at those pictures that Chef Carla was showing earlier, in the skillet, it had a little bit of rosemary, looked maybe like some artichoke, and that was just the perfect amount. And that dough rose beautifully.
I was also thinking of using garlic too, making like a garlic bread out of it.
You could use, I've seen, we've actually taken garlic cloves, roasted them in oil, and then drain the oil off and then sprinkle those on. And that roasted garlic flavor permeates the dough real well and adds a nice flavor.
That is a nice flavor, roasted garlic.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you were right, Chef. Keeping it simple, not too heavy on the ingredients. That way you can allow the dough to rise while it's baking. You know? So it's not too heavy. It's going to keep it much thinner and dense. So yeah, it's great suggestion.
More.
Yes, it's true. Benjamin, you have a question, Benjamin?
Yeah, I do have a question, but I don't know if it'll work because after what you just said, I was thinking, and I just came up with this idea. Okay, take like Travis was saying, like fruit, but I kind of want to do it to where I can put it in the dough and then flatten out and cook it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Are you talking about fresh fruit or dry fruit?
Either or.
Well, dry fruit works fine because you're not introducing a lot of moisture. It's dry already. Fresh fruit is going to throw it off a little bit because you're adding more moisture inside.
So say if I were to use dry fruit and I want to mix it in with the batter, so when it cooks, the fruit pieces where the dry fruit would be in there. Is that fine? Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay, I just didn't know if I could do that or not because I didn't know if it would turn out right or make it different.
You have to remember you're beginning to mess with the science at this point because the recipe is written specifically with the percentage. I think Chef Carla mentioned earlier in the program that it's at an 80%, the moisture level.
Right.
And then once you start incorporating additional things into the dough, you're going to begin affecting those moisture levels and the way the yeast behaves. So
Okay.
I would not recommend putting anything sweet into the dough or on top of it. I've seen it quite a bit where they do slice it in half and then they'll toast it with some olive oil and maybe spread like blueberry, rosemary jam over the top or jelly to incorporate some sweetness. But traditionally, focaccia bread is used for savory purposes, not so much on the sweet side. Chef Carla did mention earlier in the class about finishing salt over the top. Finishing salt is absolutely fantastic. Once you get that olive oil on there and then the rosemary on there, and finishing salt is traditionally a larger piece of salt that will hold its shape.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's always best, you guys, if you have never done this dough, it's always best to follow as much as you can, not to go too wild with the, just kind of trying different things, because it's always best to get the technique down first, and then you can go wild. Once you feel very confident about the technique, then you can start experimenting with flavors and things like that. And obviously, I always tell my students, once you get it down really well, like you understand the technique, then, it's your choice whether, you put fruit and you don't like it, but at least you tried it and you taste it, and you make those decisions for yourself in the future, because you guys are the future chefs. You're the ones who are going to be making these decisions later on. But for now, stick as close as you can to that recipe. It's going to help you guys, because at the end, you're not wondering, did it not come out because, was it a technique? Was it the measurements? Or was it because I added all these different, ingredients that didn't call for? Right. So it's always best to keep it simple.
Baking is like learning how to drive a car. First, you got to learn how to drive around the parking lot, and then you can start doing donuts, right? So you kind of really have to focus on learning the technique, mastering the technique before you can start making alterations to the recipes.
Exactly. And of course, I wanted to show you guys the photo requirements for this week. And for the photo requirements, I'll just tell you guys this number 4 right here. This one kind of throws students off. It says dough mix for 4 minutes or 4 minutes fast. This is actually written if you're using an actual mixer, with a hook on it, the hook attachment. So if you're not obviously, I don't want you guys to use a mixer. It's best if you guys use a, just a bowl, and you're going to be mixing it there together. So you guys can actually skip this part. Just show us that you're mixing the dough, the dough before fermenting. You can just put all the ingredients all together in the bowl, kind of start mixing it lightly, and then just take a picture of it. We just want to see the beginning process of you doing the dough. We definitely want to see the dough before fermenting in a bowl, right? That's when it has the original shape and the size. I'm sorry, not the shape, the size. And then, of course, the dough after fermenting it. This is after it has doubled in size. Then we want to see the pan, your sheet pan, with some olive oil. And then you're going to be putting the dough on top of the sheet pan. And you're going to start stretching it, kind of like the photograph that I showed you earlier. And then, of course, the focaccia before proofing. So it's a stretch dough. Focaccia after proofing, that means now you see that it has doubled in size. If you want to show us the little dimples there, you guys can actually do the dimples and take a photograph for number 10. The focaccia after it's been baked. So we want to see the whole focaccia, golden brown, of course. And then, of course, the last one is focaccia after cooling down. And you guys are going to be cutting a little slice of it so we can see the bottom, like the crumb. So let me kind of show you. What we want is to be able to see this, the crumb. Obviously, we don't want to see it in a sandwich form, but just take a little piece of it and show us the little cut so we can see how did it rise. When we take a look at the crumb, you guys, it gives me a lot. It tells me how much did it proof? Did it proof correctly? Does it look dense? Are the holes too large or stretched out? That means that it over fermented. If it looks like something like this, where you see like small, medium, large holes, that means the proofing was just right. So that's what we're looking at when we're cutting a piece of it. And of course, if I was in front of you, I would be like squeezing and tasting and all that, but wow, that's the bad part, that we're not there. I wish I was, because I love focaccia. Are there any, Danny, you have a question?
No, it just goes back to the focaccia. Can we split it up, or do you want it all in one pan?
Well, I mean, let's say, for example, I'm okay if you guys have two small, this dough, just so you know, it's perfect for a half sheet pan. It's perfect. If you decide to cut the recipe or cut the dough in half, and you're going to stretch it into this half sheet pan, you're going to have a super, super thin focaccia. So I don't recommend to divide it. It's okay if you want to divide it. If you have two smaller containers, right? Two smaller pans, then that's okay, because you have to. Because or else the entire dough is going to start like oozing out and just crawling out of the pan because it's too small. So yeah, I do recommend to cut it in half if you're using, just like the picture that I had where you have two cast iron skillets, right? That they're smaller. Yeah, definitely I suggest to half them.
Now, how long is too long on fermentation?
Too long would be that, so try to picture this, right? We have a dough that it's dense and firm at the beginning when you finish kneading it. When you put it at the beginning, it's smaller and it's dense. As it starts to rise, right, what we're looking for is double in size. So you can feel it. You can actually squeeze it and it's going to feel like a little marshmallow. Now, if it goes over that double in size, you're going to notice that the dough is going to start looking, sometimes it starts to kind of overflow from the half sheet pan, right? Kind of like a little muffin, what's it called? The muffin tops. I've seen that. You start noticing like a little muffin top kind of forming because they're starting to ooze out from the sheet pan. Also, when you touch it, the moment you touch it, it starts to deflate. It collapses and deflates. That means that the skin ended up rising way too much. The dough rose too much, and you thin out the skin way too much that is super sensitive. So the moment you touch it, it's so thin that it's just going to tear, and obviously releases all the air from that little area. So it's one of those things, you guys, that the more you do baking, and I suggest that as you do the baking, right, as you're doing the fermentation process, feel it, feel the dough, give it a squeeze. If it feels that there's some denseness, like a little dense feeling, that means it needs more air to proof. If it's double in size and it feels like a little marshmallow, like you're squeezing a marshmallow, that's the perfect amount. If you touch it and then it just deflates, that's over fermented, right? It's overdone. So I can say that again.
We should use what we see more than time.
Yes, and that's what I've been saying all the time. Go based on how it feels and how it looks, right? That double in size is super important. So maybe take a picture of as soon as you put it in the bowl so you can let it rise, or as soon as you shape it into the sheet pan, take a picture, side pictures, however you can, so you can look at it and compare, right? So now you're going to be looking for this double in size. The moment it feels like double in size and it has this little marshmallow feel, then it should be perfect to do. But I don't go based on time. I don't, because again, the time is going to reflect. It's based on the temperature that you have in your house. So everybody's going to have a different temperature. Everybody's working at a different length of time that you're fermenting and you're proofing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Danny, and we're almost out of time, you guys, but I'll take Danny and Michelle, and then that will be it. Hi, Danny. Oh, was that Danny right now? Danny, you're done, right? Michelle.
Hi, Chef. Real quick, you said that the dough will fit in a half sheet pan. Do you think that a mixture will fit in a 15-inch cast iron pan, or will it be too much?
15-inch. Well, do you know what the sheet pan is about? Is it like 18?
18
No, it's
by
22 in
26.
length. It's 22, right, Chef?
Yeah. 18 by 26.
Yeah, so it might be a little too small.
Okay, so I should just cut it in half? Cut the
You can cut it in half, or you can do like like 3/4 or something like that. But yeah, definitely you gotta put a little less dough. You can eyeball it,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And last question, Bonnie. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi. Okay. This isn't so much as a question as it is like I've messaged I've messaged you chefs.
Okay.
I'm not here all the time because I work also, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form, like I'm in school right now. I've had several of my classmates texting me and messaging me, and I was wondering if it would be okay if you guys just let me give a different perspective from one of their peers on some of the things that they have concerns about real quick. It would just take a second. I just want my peers to understand that from someone who is in the business currently, and from someone who is in a sous chef position newly, when we have our end of the course surveys, be honest with your feedback, because you can talk about so many things to so many people. But if I were to put myself in the position of you right now, I would want honest feedback, because I can't fix a problem that I don't know is happening. I can't make adjustments to the way that I am teaching, or to the way that I am coaching, or to the way that I am whatever it may be. And from someone who gets constructive criticisms from their higher up all day long about the way I carry myself, I think that we all need to remember we are here to learn, and we're not always going to like what is being said to us. Constructive criticism only makes us better. It makes us better from the head chef, the executive chef, the manager. It makes us better all the way up and all the way down. So if any of you really truly have concerns, mind you, I love that you come to me, but there are end of the course surveys for a reason. And it's only because none of us can get better unless someone tells us what we're not doing right.
And you know what?
Their feedback.
And Bonnie, if I can tell you, I wouldn't even wait for an end of the course survey, like if somebody has a concern, it's best to talk it out now, that way we can make those corrections now. So if anybody's having any concerns, obviously feel free to reach out to Chef Warren or myself, and then we can go from there. Communication is the key.
Look up to me in that aspect, or that whatever you feel comfortable in that aspect. But I didn't want to answer anybody's without
you don't want that stress or that pressure on you. Yeah, come to us. I prefer for students to reach out to Chef Warren or myself, and then we can always try to find a solution. Yeah, thank you so much, Bonnie. All right, you guys. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you out. And I do want to thank you guys for joining us today. Looking forward to, actually next week is our last week for a live session. Last one, you guys. So we're almost there. Thank you so much, chefs, for joining today. And I will see you guys next week. Have a great time, you guys. Bye-bye.